In this video, we're going to go to the Hollywood Hills to paint a cityscape. Hi, welcome to Paint Coach. I'm Chris Fornatero here to help simplify oil paint so you can get better faster. All right, first, if you like these videos, if you like this channel, please hit the like buttons, subscribe to the channel. If you have comments or questions, things you want to know more about, requests for video topics, please let me know in the comments section. I read them. Also, materials. If you don't know what materials to buy, under every video in the description, including this one, I list all the materials that I use and links to where you can buy them. Today I'm going to be walking you through this painting, but first off, we need a reference photo. So let's go do that. So I drove to the Hollywood Hills. It takes about 15 minutes from where I live. If there's traffic, it could take 2 days. I went around 9:30 to try and catch the morning light. Once it gets around noon, the sun gets directly overhead. The line just gets kind of flat, kind of a good tip for you. Set yourself up for success if you are going to be doing a landscape, cityscape. Try and go either in the morning or the late afternoon when the sun's either rising or setting. You're just going to get a lot better looking lighting options. All right, so I saw a lot of scenes that I really liked, but this one I like the best. I really like how the road leads you into the scene, and then you got this little truck or car there, which kind of is almost, I think it ended up being the focal point of the painting, but then it draws your eye upwards with these bushes and these trees with some really great highlights all the way up to this house in the top corner. I just liked how tall it was, how you had this house like sitting way up high. And since it was a very I really liked how tall everything was, like how I really wanted to emphasize this hill. I turned my canvas vertical to really emphasize the height of the trees and the bushes and how high up that house was. So I'm using an old canvas, and I'm gonna use a grid for this painting. And I'm gonna put my photo, make sure my photo's in the same 18 by 24 dimensions as my canvas. And then I'm gonna put a grid on both. I'm just gonna divide both down the middle and vertically and horizontally. It's going to give me 4 squares. I'm going to divide those 4 squares into 4 squares, and that should be enough to take it square by square and draw out this image accurately. And I'm using just thinned out pink paint. Normally I just use just red, but I put a little bit of white in there to help me see it on this dark canvas. Also, it helps see it on camera as well. So once my drawing's all in, I'm going to start in with the sky. I'm going to mix up a light blue using cerulean blue and white. And I add a little touch of Cadmium Lemon when I get down towards the horizon line or towards where the sun is on the right side of the painting. Don't slack on the sky. I feel like it's very easy for beginning painters. I know I was like this a lot, to not really pay much attention to the sky. You kind of slap on the blue, you put like a little bit of gradient as it goes down to the horizon, but really look at the sky. Like this one, I worked throughout the painting a lot, and pulling it all the way from like ultramarine blue in the on the left side, then using more cerulean and a little more Cadmium Lemon as I got closer to the sun or down to the horizon. And I really made sure it was the right value. I made sure it wasn't too light. I made sure it wasn't too dark. Because this is, it's a big element. It takes up a good amount of space on your painting, and you really want to make sure you get it right. And some artists do their sky at the first thing, the beginning of their painting. Some do it at the very end. The ones that do it at the beginning like to use it as kind of an anchor, a key for the rest of their values. Others like to do it at the end because they're afraid of, if they put it in the beginning and it's not keyed in right, then the rest of your painting is going to be keyed in wrong. It's really whatever you prefer. I actually kind of do a mix. I kind of put something in to give me kind of like a placeholder, and I'll work it as I go. May not be the best way to do it, but that's kind of what I ended up doing on this one. So a good thing to remember with landscape painting is the further things are away from you, the less saturated and a lot cooler they're going to be. So just make sure that as things get closer to you, like trees for instance, they're going to get warmer, they're going to have more reds in them, as opposed to when they're farther away, they're going to be cooler and have a little more blues in them. All right, so there's a lot of different ways to do a landscape painting. Some work the darks first, some work from the furthest element back and move to the front. A lot of times plein air painters just get their darks in first, just because they're kind of fighting against the changing light. Since we're in the studio here, I'm gonna start from the furthest element and work my way forward. And the first thing I have is these trees, and I'm gonna make sure, because I really want these trees to read as, far in the distance, so I'm gonna make sure that I'm not making the greens or the blues or the yellows in them very saturated. I'm gonna keep them very light and very unsaturated to keep them in the distance. But just because I'm starting from the furthest element back and working my way forward doesn't mean that I'm going to constantly be going back. As I'm working the painting as a whole, I'm looking how everything else is working with what I'm painting. So you might see me kind of going back and cooling it down or warming it up, or making it a little more saturated, a little less saturated. So in these beginning stages, don't get too worried about nailing the color exactly. Just get as close as you can to act as a placeholder to make decisions on the rest of the painting, and you'll dial it in time to where it needs to be. To put in these darks and midtones, I do like to keep the paint relatively thin because I'm going to be building on top of it, and the whole fat over lean, thick over thin rule applies here. And I keep the paint thin using Liquid Original, and this is going to dry the paint a lot faster. I also have a link to it in the description below. And normally I don't like my paint to dry fast, but for these beginning stages and these blocking in, it's fine because I'm going to be building on top of it a lot. So I need that paint to be thin and dry and have the colors that I put on top to stay there and not get all mixed in. So I'll just do these beginning stages with Liquid Original, but after that, when I start putting in detail and more highlights and everything, if I need to thin out my paint at all, I will use linseed oil, which actually slows the drying time and will allow me to work the paint over multiple days and get it to where I need it to be. So I kind of broke my own rule here, and I started getting in on detail a little too early. Sometimes it can be helpful having these highlights, these really bright highlights, like I'll end up putting in these red flowers here. Sometimes it can be helpful because if you know it's going to be a very bright value, you can kind of use that as a key for the rest of your other values. But just in general, I like to cover the whole painting first with the darks and midtones, just to see how everything's working together and get the values right before I go into detail. All right, so painting this car was very difficult. I did it 3 or 4, maybe even 5 times. I just could not get the size, the placement, the perspective right. But whenever you have a problem like this, just keep reworking it. Don't be afraid to wipe off the paint and start over. Actually, at a certain point, I kind of tried to refine my grid lines to find the closest intersection where the car was, to kind of help me with the placement and the size and everything. But I eventually got it, and actually being my favorite part of the painting. All right, so now that we have all our darks and midtones and all canvases covered here, we can actually start going in with some detail. Now be careful when you're doing highlights, especially with trees and bushes, that you don't push them too hard. You don't add too much white or too much yellow into your paint. It's going to be really tempting to get these really bright, powerful highlights, but you got to make sure to keep your trees in the right value zone. Now there aren't any mountains in this scene, and you're not looking into the distance too much, but just in general rule of thumb, when you're painting a landscape, there's certain value zones. Like your sky is going to be your lightest value, and then your ground plane, anything that's on flat ground, like your grasses, just flat ground, a road, those are going to be your second lightest. And after that, it's any mountains, like any slanted plains. So if you have any mountains or hills, those are going to be slightly darker than your ground, and your darkest planes are going to be in the upright objects, so trees, houses, structures, people, stuff like that is going to be your darkest. So just keep that in mind. If you have to, put your painting take a photo of your painting, put it in black and white so you can gauge the values, because that's the number one thing I see a lot of people miss with landscapes is they really want to paint these really bright highlights on their trees, and they think that they're that bright, but they're really not. If you look a lot of times on trees, you look from the dark on the trees to the light on the trees and really see how big of a difference it is. It's never as big a difference as you really think they are. Also with greens, make sure you're desaturating your greens just a little bit with like cadmium red or burnt sienna or something like that. You don't want to just mix straight blue, straight yellow. I know it might be reading like that in the photo, but you know, don't get tricked by that. There's a lot of elements with photos and working with photos, things you should be aware of, like the contrast is gonna be a lot higher in a photo than when you're looking at it in real life. So your darks are gonna be a lot darker, your lights are gonna be a lot lighter. So pay attention to that. Later on in this one, you'll see like I'll go into these sections that in the photo look completely dark and just kind of just blacked out, and I actually will put in some more greens and bring it and make it a little bit lighter, because I know that's what it is in real life. It took me a long time to realize that the photo is not everything. Don't just go by the photo 100%. You can't just be completely led just by your photograph and paint exactly what you see. You kind of have to make up some stuff or like fill the gaps, because the camera is not going to capture everything out there, which is why a lot of people like to do a plein air study first. But when you don't have that, just be aware of the changes you're going to need to make, and the way you're going to need to be creative to make the scene work. All right, so once I'm happy with my sky here and I got it to where it needed to be, then I could put in these great little tree trunks. And once I sat back and looked at it, I just wasn't getting the depth in the painting that I wanted, so I actually lightened the trees in the back. I added a little more blue and a little bit more white and desaturated just a little bit, and kind of push them in the back a little bit more. All right, so there you go. There's a brief overview of how I went about doing this painting. If you like this video, again, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. You can follow me on Instagram, see what I'm painting on a daily basis at Forza43. If there's other topics on oil painting that you want to see me make videos on, please let me know in the comment section. I will make a video on that. Any materials that you need to know where to buy them. I got links to where you can buy all the materials that I use in the description below this video, along with all my other videos. I am Chris Fornatero here telling you to get off YouTube and go get painting.